Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something along the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening. I have way too many social media links, so the best place to find me is you can go to isaacl.dev/links, and that'll take you to a website that has all of my links, so across all my different social media platforms. Also, just because, like, shout out to my wife who made me a cool shirt with my face on it. So now or have my face on. That's kind of cool. Anyway, so with that out of the way, I got some coffee. It's almost gone. I'm looking forward to chatting with my guests. We were chatting a little bit before we got started. Big advocate in the .NET space. I've ran into him a few times at conferences, and it's always good, being able to chat with him, and looking forward to chatting, in a longer form. So today my guest is Gio Dalakishvili. Gio, do you want to say hello? Introduce yourself.
Hello, I am a software engineer, mostly working in .NET. I have been coding since .NET Framework version 2, so it's been quite some time. I have some open source projects that I work on during my free time, Microsoft MVP, and occasionally speak at conferences. So I'm happy to be on the show and talk with you, Isaac, today.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. Like, I think it's always fun. It's always great getting to see people, like, face to face at conferences. But, sometimes, you live across the world for me, so I only get a few opportunities to see you. But I would love to kind of get started with the conversation about, like, how you got started. Like, do you remember when technology was introduced to you, or when you realized that it was something that you wanted to work on and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, it kind of happened partially accidentally. Like I did not have a computer at home when I was a child, but I loved mathematics, and I was always interested in more technical lessons and sciences and things like that. But I knew that I did not want to be a full-time mathematician, so I just decided to study computer science, which was like halfway between mathematics and also practical stuff. So that's how I ended up studying computer science, and I discovered that I actually enjoy coding. I remember that the feeling that I had is when I started is that when you write some code, you can instantly get
Yeah.
see the result of your action. So it
Yeah.
felt
Yeah.
nice because in other fields you may need to do some research for months or years until you get some results that you can see and touch. So that's what I found exciting to see the result almost
Yeah, no,
instantly.
I'm similar. I think you and I are similar ages. So like I grew up like building things on the web. So like being able to like save a file and it basically immediately updates a web page, like that was fascinating to me. Um, and so I'm curious, like, what did when so like you were interested in computers, right? But you said you didn't have access to one when you were younger. Like, when did you fully realize that, like, oh, there's like a career path in technology?
I think that was already when I was at the university. Uh, I I did not know I did not know anyone who worked as a programmer before, but at the university I got in touch with some students who were already finishing their studies, and when I learned what they were actually doing and how they were applying these to solve some business problems or other built some applications for the companies that they were working for. It's turned out more realistic to actually be doing the same and apply my knowledge to solve some real world problems.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating.
So I think,
Yeah, go ahead, finish up.
yeah, so it happened at the university, I think.
Yeah, no, I was a similar boat. Like I always knew that I wanted to be around computers and work with computers, but I didn't really know like how, right? I just knew that I wanted to be I wanted to work with computers and I wanted to kind of be in tech, but I didn't really know what that meant, right? Um, you said that you like, you've been building stuff in .NET Framework, sort of since .NET Framework 2.0. Was like your first job out of university? Was it a .NET job or was it, in a different technology and then you kind of moved over to .NET?
No, it was a .NET job. I worked for a local company that was building desktop applications because at that time, like 2007, the web had not taken over
Sure.
yet. So desktop applications was the norm at that time. Uh, I even remember that when I got new computer, the first thing that I would install was Visual Studio, and the next thing was MSDN offline
Sure.
documentation
Yeah.
because even looking up the documentation on internet was not so common as it is nowadays. So yeah, I started building Windows applications with Windows Forms.
Yeah, no, I always sometimes I get reminded of the fact that there was a point in time where all of the documentation for Visual Studio and .NET they were on CDs, like and the installation media, right? So like you couldn't go to a website and like look at documentation. You couldn't like, do like an installer and then it would just install the application for you from the internet. So like you were very dependent on things like MSDN magazine. You were very dependent on, like Gio mentioned, like getting documentation in the mail, which I'd imagine are on those discs, which I'd imagine, you know, I don't remember what it was like, but I could only imagine that a lot of times by the time people actually got a hold of those CDs with the documentation on it, it was probably not accurate anymore. So you probably had to go to Microsoft and get like some version of it. Here's a fun question for you. Do you remember the first application or the first thing you ever wrote? Like the first thing that you ever did in like with programming?
Uh, Well, I remember a couple of applications that I built. So one of them that I did uh, on my own for learning WinForms. It was a game like where you have to click on where you have many cards. When you click, say, turn around, and you have to find the two that shows the same images. So you have to find two cards out of the many that have the same image and
Yeah.
they disappear. And the other one was also a game, I think. Yeah, it was a game. It was a puzzle where you have 16 slots, but only 15 of them are occupied, and you have to. So they are numbered from 1 to 15, and you have to move them so that
Oh,
they are
okay.
in order. So you get them randomly, and you have one free slot where you can
Mhm.
move those numbers, and you have to order them from 1 to 15. I had an offline
Sure.
version of that game, so
Yeah, no,
uh,
like you need like very good like my kids are very good at those games like this, the games that require like good spatial awareness. I'm not very good at them for whatever reason. So I could only imagine how like difficult it would be to like write something like that. Um if like actually sitting down but then probably once you wrote it you probably realize look it's not that challenging. It's just like a lot of conditionals and things. Um you know one of the things I'd love to talk about too is you know, for folks that don't know Geo, like you've built like some really cool like open source projects. Like when did like the idea of like building software, building like tools out in the open, like when was that something that you first realized was something you could do?
Well, the very first open source projects. Well, actually, I did many years ago. I built some not projects, but I would say little applications that I published source code on codeproject.com, if you remember the
Yeah.
website. So the way the website worked was that you wrote also an article explaining the code. So I submitted a
Yeah.
couple of articles of my applications. But when I look at those code currently,
Sure. Sure.
it makes me
Yeah.
yeah. So that was in the very beginning of my career, but I would not say that they were like open source project
Sure.
in the sense that we talked about
Yeah,
them
no, I,
now.
I I remember code. I remember
Uh,
like the like Codeplex. What's the website that has the orange background? What was that called? Yeah, like
Orange?
it was.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah, that
code
is that what it
project
was? It
that
was
was
called
submitted.
that.
Yeah,
That's what it was. It was Code Project, not Codeplex.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I remember going to that website a lot because you would find some good stuff, and then like to your point is that somebody wouldn't just provide their source code; they would also provide like some information around it, like whether it was a like
yeah,
documentation or a blog post or whatever. I thought it was kind of cool. Um, it's kind of a bummer that you don't see that as much these days. Like you go to an open source project on GitHub and then maybe there's some docs for it, or maybe there's like a how-to on how to use it. But sometimes you go to a project and it's got like hundreds and hundreds of stars and it's literally just a readme and some code. And you can waste a lot of time trying to figure out how to get it to work. Um, which maybe we should go back to some requirement where if you're going to publish something to GitHub, you have to write a blog post on it too. Maybe we'll try to get that to happen. Um, I think one of yeah, go ahead.
yes. I read somewhere if you put some feature in the library and if it's not documented, then that feature does not exist.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's discovered. So I try to keep that in mind always, and because like you spend so much time on code, but without documentation, all that time is wasted because no one's going to spend time digging in this source code to learn how it works.
Oh, I completely agree. Like, I see this a lot. I see it a lot in all sorts of different programming frameworks, but I see it a lot with like npm packages. Like, so if you're building something with like Node.js, like you'll come across a repo that's got like a lot of people that are using it, or it's got a lot of contributions, and or it's got even got like a lot of followers or stars, and you'll look at some of the documentation, you're like, okay, maybe I'll play around with this, and then you'll actually install it and it won't like do exactly what you want, but over the course of you figuring that out, it's taking you hours of like playing around with it, trying to get it set up and all of that, and it's a really bad like developer experience because you know you're wasting time trying to figure out something is going to do what you want. And I'm a curious person, so like it's not something that's bad per se, but I do recognize that there is a bit of a time suck as you're kind of navigating like what open source projects that you want to use for your own stuff that you're building.
Yeah, writing documentation is kind of boring,
Sure, sure.
maybe compared to writing to code,
Yeah, yeah,
but it's worth it. Like if you want your project to become popular, then you have to invest some
yeah.
time and not only in coding.
No, I agree. It's what do they say? Like the last things that are ever done is you write the docs for it, and then you write the unit tests, and then you write the docs. Like those are like the last two things that are done, right? Because those are things that developers usually don't want to do. They don't want to write tests, and then they want to write docs, which I think is kind of funny now because we have like these AI assistants like Copilot or whatever, right? It's like, okay, Copilot, write these tests for me. All right, Copilot, write this documentation for me. And then the developers, they don't have to do that. But then also Copilot, write this code for me, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Interesting experience. The Copilot helps with the tests and
Yeah.
documentation. But if you ask it to write everything, then it may fail to write the test that actually finds the bugs
Yeah.
in the code. So you have to be careful there.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've used these tools for is like being able to just get me started. Because I'll have an idea and I'm like, oh, do I really want to like create 10 files and then like create all these classes and do all these things, right? And, if I can have, two or three back and forth conversations with the prompt and it creates all this stuff for me, it makes my life a bit better. Like I created a browser extension a few months ago to do something, and I've never written a browser extension before. I know JavaScript, but I've never written a browser extension before. So like it was super helpful in like getting me to a point where I could actually like start building one, which I think is super interesting because it gets developers like closer to be able to write code, which I like code that only they can write, which I think is pretty cool.
It's good for repetitive
Yeah.
stuff too. If you have some code that's slightly different between different places, it can. If you write one or two examples, it's very good at figuring the other
Yeah.
part of the code. It also helped me in. So I have this open source project which is a Visual Studio extension for viewing framework
Mm-hmm.
query plan. So I'm currently working on adding support for MySQL query plans. So I needed some example queries to test the parts that throws the query plans. So I needed some MySQL queries. So I asked the Copilot to some couple of SQL queries, and I generated like 20 queries, and I used them to test how my plan visualizer worked for these types of queries, because every different SQL operator gives different plan outputs. So I needed some collection of query plans to test my extension with. So it gave me a bunch of queries that I could use for testing the extension.
Yeah, no, there is some like I'm not saying that it's bad. I think one of the things that I think is pretty fascinating about it is that like how people will ultimately decide whether or not it's like, okay, do I just continue to tell this prompt to do over and over like what I could do? And it's like, were you like, are you getting more keystrokes by like typing it all out yourself because you might have it all in your head, or like having the prompt do it, copy paste, and then say, okay, this doesn't exactly do what I want, prompt, copy paste, right? Like that back and forth interaction where it's like we're actually not writing code ourselves, we're kind of just using natural language to have like an AI do it is a pretty fascinating like, and I don't know if that's ideal for a lot of developers. Like I know a lot of developers that probably don't want to do those sort of things, but I think that it's pretty clear that there is a ton of value in using some of these AI assistants.
Yeah, I think it's like when you copied the answer from Stack Overflow,
Yeah, sure.
sometimes you copy it without understanding what exactly
Yeah.
it does. So instead of going to browser, searching, going to Stack Overflow and copying, now you do everything inside your IDE. Kind of similar in that sense.
Yeah.
So, but like Stack Overflow, where when you copy your code, you have to actually spend some time to try to at least understand
Yeah.
some on high level what it does. So you should probably also do the same for AI.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, like when I look at Stack Overflow questions, like I actually try to understand what the answer is. Like that's one of the things I appreciate about Stack Overflow is that if somebody just like posts like code as an answer, like a moderator or somebody will come in and say like, don't just paste code, explain what your code does, explain why you think this code works, blah blah blah, right? Which I think is really valuable. And you get that from the copilots too. Like you ask the copilot to do something, or any of these tools, not just Copilot, and it'll list out its thinking, and then it'll give you some code. And then if you ask a question for it, it'll obviously explain a bit more. Um, but I still think that there's like this level of like trust. Like I think that maybe people would put too much trust in what the assistants are doing, like because honestly, it's just trained on data from other people's repositories, right? Which, good, bad, or indifferent, like it might not do exactly what you want, right? But I do think that for some of the things that you were saying, like low hanging fruit or repetitive tasks, like super valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Go ahead.
yeah, but sometimes it will invent some stuff that does not exist at
Sure,
all.
sure.
So
Yeah.
you have to be
Yeah,
careful.
I
Yeah.
remember having like, and I don't want to go down this path of talking too much about like AI coding assistants. I'd love to talk about the open source stuff that you're doing. Um, but like the thing that kills me sometimes is you'll be using it and then like it'll like think that there's like methods or extensions like on top of objects that don't exist. Like, maybe you have like a client API of some sort, and then like you hit client dot and it'll like want to insert some method that doesn't exist, and you're like, hey, where are you getting this from? I'm guessing that like there's some similar code somewhere that has client dot, and you're just taking the most used example, right? So it is one of those things where developers are still going to have to know what they're doing. Like I don't think we're at a point here in the near future where it's like it's going to completely replace how developers think.
One thing that I noticed with the assistance is that if it generates code that's wrong, if you ask it again and tell it what is wrong, the second time it will generate correct
Yeah.
answer. Like I was testing some HTML and CSS generation, and when I copied the code from assistant and it broke the layout, if I tell it so this is broken after these changes, then it will sync and
Yeah.
generate correct version of the same
Yeah, maybe it's just like a
feature.
giant like thing maybe to trick developers into thinking more. Like, you ask it something, it gives you a wrong response, and then you're like, no, 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 that's not the right response. I want this sort of response. And then it's like, yes, you could have typed it yourself, but I'll type it for you. Um, I would like to talk about some of the open source stuff that you're doing, right? Like, we teased a little bit at the beginning, but you've created a couple of extensions that I think are pretty cool, and I'd like to talk about them a little bit. Like, to start off, like we asked this a little bit ago, like when did open source like first introduce itself to you? Like, when did you realize that you kind of had like this interest in building like tools for developers? Because we'll talk about what these tools are in a second, but I'm very curious because I think that a lot of people they don't think about like meta programming or like building tools for developers as something that's kind of interesting to them. Like, when did you like realize that, oh, I like kind of building tools to make developers' lives a bit better?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons and ideas behind it is that you just build something that is useful to
Yeah,
you, and then you the web because others may find it useful. That's how I got started with my first most popular open source project, which is a library for entity framework. It simplifies handling
yeah,
exceptions. So I remember I was copy pasting this code from
yeah,
one
yeah,
project to another at my projects. So I just decided to add some more code and make it complete so that I could put it out on the internet. And after that, I tried to promote it a little bit here
yeah,
and there, and it got. I wouldn't say that it's very popular
sure,
because it's not as popular as the big ones, but it's like at 1,600 stars, which is
Yeah.
impressive for a
No, I don't.
project.
Yeah,
And
don't sell
it's
yourself short. Like, I think that this is how I see it, right? Like, if more than one person gets value out of something that you've built, like, I mean, you've done something. And, the fact that, you have 1,600 different people that took the time to actually click the star button, right? Like, I think that's pretty cool. Like, and it's one of those things where, it solves a very particular problem, right? Like, good, bad, or indifferent, like some tools, like the exception handling, like there's so many exceptions that exist and inner exceptions that happen inside of there and all these sort of things. Like, you know, we end up having to write like a lot of code just to like get to that root thing, right? And then we have to pipe that out to like some error handling mechanism or logging mechanism to actually like, okay, when we're getting exceptions, we're able to see them and get information on them pretty quickly. Um, I what was it about, like, you mentioned that you had kind of written the same code over and over again. And here's a silly question. Like, how many times do you think you had written it, like, or copy pasted code from other projects before you realized, like, oh, I should probably just make this like an open source package, publish it to NuGet, have it on GitHub. Like, like, how many times do you think you actually went through that exercise of basically copy pasting that code before you thought it was a good idea?
yeah, probably about
Oh, okay,
3 or 4
that's not bad.
projects.
If you would have said like 20, I've been like, okay, that sounds more like me. Like, where I'll build something. Like, I have this little internal tool that it's not, I mean, yeah, I didn't build, like, I copy paste the same code over and over again because it's very specific to what I'm doing. And I'm like, okay, well, if I put it up on like GitHub, like, who cares? Like, I built like a little thing to like basically, uh, publish things to social media platforms, right? Because obviously with this podcast, and then I have like a link shortener that I post on social media a lot, like, and it's not always me that's doing it. So I have like I wrote all these different things, like how to post to Blue Sky, how to post to Twitter, how to post to LinkedIn, whatever, right? So I have like this library that I just kind of like this project that I just kind of float around, um, because it's very specific to what I'm trying to do. And yeah, I could probably break it out and make it more agnostic and all of that. But I'm like, okay, do people actually want that sort of thing? And the answer is probably yes, but I'm also lazy. So maybe I don't want to do it. Maybe I don't want to like have to like maintain something like that. So the question that I have after that little rant is like, what did you think about that when you were deciding, okay, well, I'm going to put this out to GitHub and I'm going to make it a NuGet package that people can consume? Did you think about, okay, well, now that everybody sees it, people are going to use it and they might have issues, and then I have to maintain issues that they have? Or did you kind of want that experience and want to be able to kind of contribute in that way with people?
Uh, uh, I don't remember
Yeah.
thinking about that, but I realized that it can be
Yeah.
it can become boring after a while. Uh, so I read somewhere that developers have open source projects because developers usually enjoy solving problems, and doing open source is just a way to keep doing what you enjoy. So you just work on interesting problems that you can think of, and keeps the fun part of programming, which even if you program at work, it can there are some repetitive tasks. So open source is kind of to keep the fun part in programming, but but uh, but it also becomes boring from time to time, and I think it's important to don't not to feel pressured when you get issues, or some people are asking for features that are very specific to their needs, so you can't really implement all the features because you implement the feature once, but the maintenance needs to be done all the time you touch the library. So yeah, it can become also stressful if you try to accept every feature request, and so sometimes I have open issues which I know are bugs and I should fix, but I just if I don't have time to work on them, I let myself not to worry about them, because the projects are for me uh, to enjoy the coding, and I try not to get tired from them.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, especially as you know, and I don't know if you're like me, is I kind of get like you mentioned the word bored. I do get bored with stuff pretty quickly, and if I think that I'm kind of like over or done building something, it's very very hard for me to go back to that code base and like maintain and add things, right? So I've just always ended up like if somebody wants something, I always just say like just a blanket statement like I welcome pull requests. So if you want to like open up a pull request, I'll review it, and if it makes sense and if I can test and everything works, it's not going to affect other users, then sure. What I've noticed over from doing that is that a lot of people just disappear, right? They'll say like, "Oh, like if you want this, that's great. Like more than welcome for to review your pull request." A lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to consume the product, the project, right? Um, but for you, like I took a look and you had, some of your projects, you have a fair amount of contributors, right? So like what was that feeling of, people coming and wanting to actually like add code or add contributions to your project? How did that make you feel initially?
That's a very good
Yeah.
feeling,
Yeah.
I have to say, because uh, when you build a open source project and others just use it's already a good feeling. But when others go beyond that and co, co they contribute, that's even more wonderful, because they actually took some time to get familiar with the code base and implement the features that the features are maybe for their own interest, but still they took some time to implement the feature. So I value such contributions very much, because it means that they care at least for the features that they are contributing for. Uh, so maybe if it's not, maybe even just discussing the implementation with them can be very helpful, because when you are the only one building the code and testing it and doing everything around the project, it can become
A lot. Yeah.
stressful and difficult. Yeah. So even having someone to talk about it is very uh, very good support for me.
Yeah, I mean, also plus it also probably feels good knowing that people care about what you're doing enough to like take time out of their own day, right? Like, for
Yeah.
instance, I'm looking at your exceptions repo right now, right? And you have, 12 other contributors, right? Well, you have 12 contributors, you're one of them, obviously. And yeah, most of them are you, like, let's be real, but it's also your project. And, I think the one thing that I find really cool about this is the fact that maybe these were people that, they came across your library, they were using it in their own projects, maybe they're using it at their company, and they're like, there's this one little thing that it needs to do in our use case, but I think that it might be valuable to contribute back. Do you but there is one thing that I've always kind of been interested about, like projects that like have other external contributors. Like, do you try to like have like some level of acceptance? Like, what I mean by is if somebody commits something to your project, do you have like some sort of guidelines they need to follow? Like, can't does it like does it follow a particular, the same patterns as this does it? Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, do you have any requirements or criteria for people that contribute to your projects typically?
I think I don't have anything written as a
Yeah.
guide, but I always expect tests because if you send me some codes, you should also tell me how to actually test it. And I mean, you should include the required tests because I don't want to spend time figuring out how to test it or what dependencies I have to set up. So if you are contributing code, you should also include unit tests. It's very with unit test, it's very easy and safe to just run it and see them that it works as they described in the
Mhm.
pull request. So if the coding style is off, that's okay because I can quickly refactor it if it's very different. But the code has to pass the tests. The new code has to pass the
Yeah.
tests.
No, it's yeah, for sure. I think that's like a base level where it's like, okay, if you're going to commit, like if you're adding a feature, like make sure that the feature has unit tests or has regression tests or what have you. Also documentation. Like we talked about this a bit earlier, right? Like I can't imagine it be more annoying, right? If somebody else writes a feature for an open source project, contributes it, and then in the future that person disappears, right? Like they're not maintaining the feature they wrote, you are, and you don't know how it works because you didn't write it. So now you have to like figure out what this code does, right? So documentation around, okay, what this feature actually does is super valuable as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Maybe also include comments because you actually like the person who contributes the code, like you said, they disappear and they
Yeah.
don't end up maintaining it, but it's the library author who keeps maintenance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, like
yeah,
especially like Hacktober comes around. Like I have a couple of open source projects that are, I mean, they're not as popular as yours, but people have used them, right? And like during like Hacktoberfest, like people will just randomly like create issues and then create pull requests for those issues and then try to get them merged. And I'm like, I mean, I appreciate your contribution, but like you're trying to like check a bunch of boxes to get something from GitHub. Like you're not really bringing any value to my project. Which in the past people have been kind of like, oh, why don't you just accept it? Like they'll fix like a typo or something, but like they'll create an issue and then they'll create a pull request for that issue, and then it's like to fix like one word or something, or like I've seen it a few times where it's like they just rephrase a sentence. Like I have a sentence in Docs and they'll just like rewrite it a little bit to make it different. I'm like, well, what are you doing? Like you're just like you're trying to get like a green thing in your little like contributions graph in GitHub, which is I mean, I don't really follow my contribution graph at all. Some people do though.
yeah. Actually, there is one person on GitHub. He has an issue template that has a couple of
Yeah,
checkboxes, and the last one says that I have not read anything, and I have seen a couple of issues where the person who opens the issue, they ticked everything without actually reading. So
yeah.
they actually tick the one that says I have not read anything anything of the template, and I just checked everything. So it's kind of an easy way to filter people who blindly put all the checkboxes there.
Um, yeah, no, it is pretty fascinating. One of the things too is that we talked a little bit about like one of your projects, like the exception handling for Unity framework, but I think one of the first time I saw something that you had built and I came across your name is for the extension for VS Code that you wrote. Do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, it's for the full. Yeah, it's for the
Oh, I'm
full
sorry.
VS,
Yeah, sorry.
not the
It's for
code.
full Visual Studio, not VS Code. Sorry. And it's called like EF Core Visualizer. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project and again, like why you kind of love diving deep into this entity framework space. Like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, entity framework, I'd rather just not. Like, you want to tell me a little bit, one, to start off, like, why do you like entity framework so much? Let's start there.
Well, I just used it for many years at work, and yeah, I had to learn how it works. So yeah, many people hate it, but also many people don't actually invest time in learning the stuff that they use. So so yeah, I can't say that I love it, but it makes me more productive, and I remember using plain
Yeah.
ADO.NET in that it's really productive for developers. So this extension that you mentioned, so actually it started many years ago with linkpad. If you know the tool, so linkpad is a separate standalone tool. You can build the database model directly without writing
Yeah.
the code. You can connect to a database engine and start writing link queries directly. And most requested features for linkpad was to use the query plan inside linkpad. And I built an extension for linkpad at first, where you could use the plan inside linkpad. So after that, I decided to bring it to Visual Studio. So that's where the idea of building this extension came from. So I already had the code to fetch the query plan from the database, and the visualization part comes from other open source projects. There is one library for SQL servers that can turn the SQL Server query plan into HTML. There is also another library for Postgres that turns Postgres query plan into a visual representation. So I just ported the linkpad extension to Visual Studio extension. And it kind of coincided that when I was building it, the Visual Studio team released the new extensibility library for Visual Studio, so you did not have to use the old COM-based APIs. They put the nice abstraction on top of that. So I just load the Edge Microsoft Edge WebView control in the window and give it the HTML to render the plan. So that's building it, and yeah, it got interest
Yeah.
of big names. Even Scott Hanselman tweeted about it. So that's probably how other people found it.
Yeah, I think, one of the thing, and you talked about it a little bit, right? Like, yeah, one of the great mysteries for a lot of people for a long amount of time with Entity Framework is, okay, what is the actual query that's being created, right? And there's been lots of, I guess, like jokes in like the .NET ecosystem about like the Entity Framework queries and what they actually get created that are highly optimized now. But I remember, you know, when I was first introduced to Entity Framework Core when I was kind of a more younger developer, and I had like a little bit of a SQL background. Like, I would look at like the query that gets created by Entity Framework and be very confused because, there's these brackets and these parameterized things, and I just didn't really understand like why it just didn't look like the SQL queries that I wrote. And I learned over time as to why that was the case. But if anybody's had to work with like a database administrator or a DBA, like they care very much about like the structure of the SQL query and like, you mentioned like the query plan, basically how the query actually gets run on the database engine, right? To the effect that like I worked with a database administrator and we were using Entity Framework in this project, and he sent me a message and he's like, come to my desk please or whatever. And I went over to his desk and he's showing me SQL logs with these queries in them that are obviously Entity Framework queries, but he didn't know that because he's not a .NET developer. And he's like, what are these queries? And I was like, okay, well they're from this thing called Entity Framework and whatever. And he's like, these are terrible queries. Like you can't use these. And like it was a very interesting conversation because like obviously Entity Framework is a great thing for .NET developers, but to a DBA who didn't know anything about them, he was very much against them. So, it's one of those things where, a tool like yours, you can, take a look at the query plan, make sure that it works, and then if you have a conversation with the DBA, you can show them this and like, oh, this is why it's running like this particular way, and just make a better experience around that conversation. Um, the question that I have is like, have you ever been in a scenario where like this has saved you like a lot of performance on like an Entity Framework query call? Like using this tool and like understanding like was that the initial idea was like I have some SQL queries that are slow. Why are they slow? Or is it more around the path of just trying to get a better idea of like all queries that you were writing?
Um, so I usually try to be very careful when I write Entity Framework queries because, well, in the past, because I started with .NET
Sure, sure, sure,
Framework 2
sure.
when there was no link and no Entity Framework, I wrote all the queries
Yeah, using
but
like
myself.
ADO.NET or something like that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I learned the hard way how to write proper. So I think that's helpful for me to write good Entity Framework core plans because I know what I have to pay attention to when writing queries. So I also try to do the same with Entity Framework. But the developers who have never written the plain query, for them it's easier to make a mistake when using Entity Framework. So for me, I knew that in the past when I wanted to diagnose a slow query, I would put it in SQL Server Management Studio, turn on the query plan, and look at the query plan so thought that you don't need to look at the plan of every query that you write in Entity
Yeah.
Framework, but when you need it, you need it very very much. So I thought it would be useful. But also I have noticed that many people write bad queries because they just don't know how Entity
Yeah.
Framework works or how SQL Server works. So it also it's the Entity Framework kind of makes it easier to make mistakes if you are not attentive, because for example you can have lazy loading and it will magically load the entities, but if you use it in production and you have a loop around the nested entities, it will be very slow, and it's also very hard to, if you have a test environment where the data is very small in the database, it's hard for developers to write proper queries, because in the test environment you have a couple of rows in tables, it's fast, and you deploy it in production and you have a table with millions of records, and suddenly
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
slow. So
No, I mean, yeah, I've made some mistakes in the past, I guess you could say. Like I, turning on like advanced logging and things like that. And I've never been in a position where it like took down a production database or anything like that, but I could imagine that that sort of risk is always there. Um, I think one of the things that, as we're starting to get towards the end is, you know, what are some of the other things like, I'm curious, like, what are some of the other areas that you're looking into? Like, I can tell you're somebody that, uh, that very much like likes to build things. So like, is there something that you're currently building on these days that you'd like to kind of share and maybe tease a little bit?
So as I said, for for this project, I'm now working on the MySQL support
Yeah.
because there is no existing library that turns MySQL plain
Mm-hmm.
to HTML that you can view in a visual way and not just a textual version of the plain. So it will probably be published in a week or two. Uh, I also have to publish an update for the exceptions library. I accepted a PR in November that I still have not published on NuGet because I'm making some breaking changes and have not got time yet to finish them. Other than that, I also have a DO.NET provider for DuckDB, which is an embedded database for all-up scenarios for analytical queries. But I would not say that I'm actively working on it now because it's more or less
Okay.
done at this point. So it's
Yeah.
quite stable for the past 6 months or a year already.
What was it about DuckDB specifically? Like, I mean, not to say that it's not like one of the it's not a great sort of database provider to use, but there are other ones out there, right? Did you have to use it for a project? Like, what was the reason why you wanted to kind of use like look into, adding support for DuckDB?
Uh, yeah, so I came a post on Reddit when the database when the duck said that it was like SQLite,
Hmm.
but
Yeah,
for analytical queries,
sure.
and I thought that if it could become maybe not as popular as SQLite, but even if it
Yeah.
gets a fraction of its attention and users, there will be a need for the .NET provider, and maybe some opportunities could arise because of the
Hmm.
work that I did. So I decided to build the provider, and it was quite fun because I had to work with the with interoperating with the native library and even use some unsafe code, which was fun to deal with. Not when it was throwing
Oh, sure.
access
Yeah. Yeah.
violation exceptions, but still it was it was quite different from all the stuff that I used during the
Yeah.
day. So I enjoyed the process.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think, it's very clear that like you're very curious and you want to play around and learn some new stuff. Like, I think that's great. I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about this conversation is like, if you have an interest in something, it's, and you feel like you can build things or you're continually doing something that's very, very similar, like there's no harm in taking the code that you wrote, publishing it out to GitHub, and then maybe other people will take advantage of it. So I want to give you some kudos for, taking that initiative because, your tools, like you were joking about, you don't have uh it's not the biggest projects, but they bring value to the people that use them. And I imagine that some people that might be watching this are like, oh, like I definitely have issues when I'm trying to like consume Entity Framework exceptions, or I want to be able to see the query plan or the execution path for some queries. So like maybe they'll come across this and they'll want to use your tools, and that's great. So as we wrap up, I'd love to kind of, get your thoughts at, we've been talking for an hour about the things you find interesting, like how you got started in tech, open source, which you obviously are a huge proponent of, the .NET ecosystem, which you're a very, you're a great community member. What are some of the things that you're excited about .NET, about any framework, about open source? Like, what are some of the things that you're thinking about these days?
Well, probably it's not really new, but if I look at all the changes that .NET has gone from the days when I started to becoming
Yeah.
open source, becoming cross-platform, and I mean it's been a couple of years already, maybe already a decade, but it's still exciting for me to see the changes that .NET has gone through since .NET Core began. So it's to look at all the open source process of .NET, the .NET performance improvements that have been bringing huge gains in every release. So I'm really excited about the progress that .NET has had in the last couple of years and the direction that it's going.
Yeah.
So it's exciting.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, I've been a .NET developer or in the .NET ecosystem almost my entire professional career, and I'm excited. I'm always excited. .NET 10 is going to come out this year, and that'll be exciting. And yeah, I mean the community is great. The people that work on the product are great, and it's just a great place to build interesting things. So that's why I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. Did you
Yeah,
have something you want to add?
yeah. I remembered that the Microsoft Connect, I think that was what it called, where you could bugs for .NET
Yeah.
or other libraries also. And if you submit it there, like it would take months
Yeah.
or years for it to be actually triaged and fixed. And nowadays you can just open issue on GitHub. You have team members from .NET who will actually reply to you in a couple of days, and you can reach the
Yeah.
.NET team anytime you want. So it's like a huge change from that time.
Yeah, no, we were talking about this before we got started about like how it's great being an
Yeah.
MVP for developer technologies because you get access to all this stuff, but like we're also very guilty. We're also very fortunate that the .NET team and the Visual Studio team are super accessible. Like you can see them and reach out to them whenever you want to because they're so welcoming and looking for feedback, which is great. Um, this conversation has been awesome, Gio. Like it's like it was nice to see you when we were both in Prague a couple of months ago, and I'm looking forward to seeing you. Maybe I'll see you at the MVP summit. Hopefully, we'll be able to catch up. So for folks that are curious about some of the stuff that Gio's building, we talked about some of the like the NuGet package or the Visual Studio extension. There'll be some links to some of that stuff in the show notes. You can also follow him on social media. Like the best way is probably Twitter or X. So his handle is GIODALAKISHVILI. And again, there'll be links to some other social media places as well down in the show notes. So before we sign off, my friend, did you have any last parting words?
I just wanted to mention, so when we talked about
Yeah.
open source, that for the DuckDB.NET driver, I also got award from AWS
Yeah.
.NET Fund. So yeah, I don't, I think committee or
Yeah.
or I'm mistaken? Who?
Yeah, no, so that was something that when I was at AWS, we had the opportunity to kind of build out like a fund to sponsor open source projects, and yeah, I think it's awesome being able to give back to the community, and I'm glad to hear that I'm glad that you were a recipient of that because it's well deserved for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, apart from benefiting other people from your work, you may also get some financial
Yeah.
support if you are lucky.
Yeah. No, for sure. Like it's one of those things where you know, if like sometimes good if you do good things, sometimes good things happen to you as well. So I think, again,
Yeah.
like kudos to you for, being able to do all that hard work to get that little bit of money. I bet you it probably went a long way. Um so again, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to. I know it's getting late for you. Um, so with that, I'd like to thank the folks for watching this live and the folks that are listening to this in the future. So my name is Isaac Levin. This has been Coffee and Open Source, and for my friend Gio, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.